Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us online for this session taking place December the 6th. My name is Jeff Overmars. I am a communications advisor at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel and panelists in just a moment. I do want to acknowledge that we are gathered here virtually in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. Mi'kmaq people have made these lands their home since time immemorial, and they remain the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. At the Human Rights Commission, we embrace Mi'kmaq teachings such as Imsit Nogama, meaning all my relations, which honors the inherent interconnectivity of all things. And I would also like to acknowledge the deep contributions of persons of African descent to the ongoing efforts to bring greater inclusion and equity across all communities. The work of African Nova Scotians has not only advanced the rights and dignity of people within the African Nova Scotian and Black communities in Nova Scotia, but has made great advancements to protect the rights of all individuals. It is due to the foundational work of African Nova Scotian leaders in community that the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission itself came into existence. And the very first, and the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, I should say, was drafted by an African Nova Scotian man. So we at the Commission continue to honor this legacy and build upon the foundational work of all African Nova Scotians. A few bits of housekeeping. This is, I think, the 9th session as part of Nova Scotia Human Rights Week, and I'm really grateful and excited of the turnout that we've had for these sessions. And I promise that this discussion is going to be very engaging and informative. For folks that are looking for recordings from previous sessions, those that have already taken place have been posted to the Commission's website. You can find those there. And this session will be posted to the Commission's website within 24 hours. For anyone online wishing to turn on your closed captions, you can do so along the bottom of the screen. Anyone wishing to spotlight or pin the ASL interpreters are able to do so as well. So please avail yourselves of those services. This is a Zoom webinar, so the means of engagement is through the Q&A box, which you'll also see along the bottom of the Zoom screen. Should you have questions at any point throughout this presentation, I would ask that you submit those within that Q&A box, and then when we get to the appropriate time in the presentation, we'll turn to those questions. So if you hear something in one of the presentations as we go through them and a thought pops in, just drop those questions in and we'll get to those at the appropriate time. The topic of today's discussion is land titles, community land trusts, and housing initiatives within African Nova Scotian communities. And I'm really pleased to have a number of presenters here, both from community and from within the Office of African Nova Scotian Affairs. I want to introduce Sunday Miller from Acoma Holdings, Curtis Whiley, who will be presenting on the Hammonds Plains Community Land Trust, and also Holly Adams and Larissa Lee, who will be up first speaking about the Land Titles Initiative. So without further ado, I'll throw over to you, Holly and Larissa. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for the introductions and for offering the land acknowledgement for us. I'm going to jump right into the historical context from the Land Titles Initiative. So 4 major migrations of people of African Caribbean descended to Nova Scotia. The first group were the Black Loyalists. They were promised free land by rations by the British for their loyalty during the American Revolution. However, the land they received was often poor quality, and they were denied full rations and assistance they were promised. This broken promise contributed to approximately 1,190 Loyalists leaving Nova Scotia in 1792 to relocate to Freetown, Sierra Leone. The second group were the Maroons. They were exiled from Jamaica by the British and brought to Nova Scotia, where they primarily settled in the Preston area, facing conditions similar to those experienced by the Black Loyalist: poor land, unfulfilled promises, and systemic discrimination. The majority chose to leave Nova Scotia in the 1800s, relocating to Sierra Leone. The War of 1812 was a conflict between the United States and Britain. During this time, many African Americans escaped slavery by joining the British forces. Fighting for their freedom, after the war in 1815, they were brought to Nova Scotia and settled in communities like Upper Hammonds Plains. Despite their contributions, they faced racism, were denied promised land grants, and received minimal support. And the last group was the later arrival hailing from Alabama and the Caribbean. They came to Cape Breton in the 20th century seeking economic opportunities. Many found work in the coal and steel industries, but faced widespread racism and broken promises. These historical injustices had lasting impacts, creating significant barriers to economic prosperity for African Nova Scotian communities today. The result of our history is that for over 200 years, many African Nova Scotians across the province have been living on land passed down by their ancestors without clear title. In 1841, more than 100 Preston residents petitioned the government, saying in part, to allow land grants to pass confirming titles to land they occupy, holding only tickets of location. We were tied to the land without being able to live upon it, sell it to advantage, or even vote upon it without being questioned, browbeaten, and sworn. Residents understood this barrier back then. However, their petition went unanswered for 123 years. In 1962, Premier Robert Stanfield acknowledged these issues and established the Interdepartmental Committee on Human Rights to address challenges faced by Black Nova Scotians. In 1964, the Land Titles Clarification Act was established. LTCA laid out the process for residents in 13 communities across Nova Scotia to gain title to their land. It was intended to be efficient, timely, and less expensive means for residents with designated LTCA areas to obtain clear land title. Over time, claims under the Land Title Clarification Act sharply declined due to systemic barriers. Strict interpretations of the law, discriminatory policies, and lack of resources hindered residents' ability to meet the criteria. Without the means to navigate the process, many were left without clear title, perpetuating inequalities and blocking access to generational wealth. In the fall of 2015, the government launched a 2-year pilot project aimed to supporting land title clarification in 3 LTCA areas: East Preston, North Preston, and Cherry Brook. While these new dedicated supports were introduced, the pilot faced challenges including limited participation from potential applicants. Only 5 files were successfully completed during the project. The initiative was led by the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, as they were responsible for administering the act at that time. In February of 2017, the Preston Land Initiative pro bono group created the Nova Scotia Barrister Society, conducted a thorough review of the challenges in the land titles clarification, identified key issues, and made recommendations to address the progress and costs associated with multiple acts, including the Land Title Clarification Act, the Probate Act, the Land Registration Act, and the Municipal Government Act. This work highlighted the systemic barriers residents faced in securing land titles and providing a foundation for potential reforms. In September 2017, the UN Expert Working Group of Experts of People of African Descent presented a report to the UN Human Resource Council, raising serious concerns about systemic anti-Black racism and structural discrimination in Canada, including Nova Scotia. The report highlighted the legacy of slavery, segregation, and marginalization, emphasizing the ongoing negative impact on African Canadians, particularly African Nova Scotians, the largest racially visible group in the province. The working group specifically expressed concern over the lack of implementation of the Land Titles Clarification Act, a critical tool for resolving land claim issues in historical Black communities. They urged collaboration with affected communities and equitable implementation of policies to address these issues. The Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission echoed these concerns, calling for action from all government levels to address the report's recommendations. Combined, these progressive efforts spurred government action and led to the creation of the Land Titles Initiative. I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Holly Adams.
Thank you so much for that historical background, Larissa. I appreciate that. The Land Titles Initiative was established on September 27th, 2017, as a cross-departmental collaboration between the Departments of Justice, Communities, Culture, Tourism and Heritage, Natural Resources and Renewables, Municipal Affairs and Housing, Service Nova Scotia, and Internal Services and Nova Scotia Legal Aid. The initiative was premised on addressing the historical systemic racism affecting Nova Scotians, African Nova Scotian communities, recognizing at its onset the significant barriers such as legal fees, survey costs, and other expenses made clearing title to ancestral lands extremely challenging. The Land Titles Initiative serves the following ANS communities: North Preston, East Preston, Cherrybrook, Lake Loon, and that's in HRM. And then within the Guysborough County, we serve Sunnyvale and Lincolnville. This model is rooted in the need to address historical injustice and build community support and trust. And the LTI's objectives are to clear as many land parcels as possible, to educate residents on the title clarification process, enabling them to maintain clear titles and share this knowledge with others. We also aim to build trust between communities and government by being accessible through dedicated positions and hosting office community hours in the communities that we serve. Excuse me. We also involve community leaders through initiatives like the Community Liaison Committee. And our measurable goal is to bring each of the communities we serve to at least 65.75% clear title, aligning with the provincial average. We offer the clarification through 3 different streams. One is the migration, which is under the Land Registration Act, and this can be based on paper title or title by certified based on adverse possession. We also cover a stream with estate administration under the Probate and Intestate Succession Acts. And last but not least, applications through the Land Titles Clarification Act. We also have additional supports to sublimate our work. As previously mentioned, the barriers that prevented residents for clarifying title were largely centered around the cost. Legal fees, disbursements, survey fees, probate tax, and security. These all led to the title issues compounding over time. And under the Land Titles the Land Titles Initiative, all these costs are covered for our clients. So legal fees, survey costs, probate tax for estates. And we also have a self-insured fund that was created to bond the estates where securities are required. Community navigators are central to program delivery, and me, Larissa, and our missing colleague, Amel, are the first point of contact for the clients within the communities. We're on the ground, so to speak, and meeting with the clients at their homes or at community centers within these designated areas. We coordinate with surveyors and lawyers, and our role is the key link between community stakeholders and government. We keep all matters on track, set reasonable expectations, and help to build trust. The LTI offers mediation services, and through this, the mediator assists with clarifying common interests, areas of dispute, and supports clients in considering options for agreement and reaching compromises. Lastly, our Community Liaison Committee supports the Land Titles Initiative by ensuring transparency and incorporating communities' input. Members provide valuable advice and context, sorry, context on the needs of each community they represent, and the committee includes at least 2 representatives from each of the 5 communities, and we meet on a bi-monthly basis. Let's take a moment to reflect on how the initiative began. Operations launched in 2018 with a very small team of just 2 community navigators, 1 Crown surveyor, and 2 survey technicians. Legal support was provided at that time by 2 of the Nova Scotia legal aid staff lawyers and 2 of their paralegals. In 2020, acceleration efforts were initiated to expand and enhance the initiative's impact. And the act was enacted in April 2021, amended and consolidated the LTCA. In November 2021, authority for Part 1 of the LTCA transferred from DNRR to ANSA. And this streamlined processes, fewer departments were involved. LTI staff could now review the LTCA applications through a more cultural lens, and certificates of claim and title are issued by the Minister of ANSA. The Land Administration Officer positions and funding are now also under ANSA. And in respect to our legal and survey service transition, we expanded our legal services. We now have 8 private firms across the province and over 62 lawyers working in the Land Titles Initiative and on the files, as well as some of their support staff within the firm. And all survey services moved from DNRR to private firms. Regulations, Phase 1 regulations under review to operationalize the commissioners, and that has now been completed. And Phase 2 is focused on negotiations, streamlining applications, and expanding LTCA areas, and that is currently in development. And this is our organizational structure. So we are under the Minister of the Honorable Twyla Gross, and then our Deputy Minister is Tracy Thomas. We then have an Executive Director, Lauren Grant, and we have her admin, Tiffany Lescad, and we have our Director, Curtis Whiley, who will be speaking a little later on. And then we have our new manager that just started this week, Victoria Button-Brooks. We have 2 land administration officers, Laverne Gleason and Lori Blackmore. And we have the 3 community navigators, myself, Larissa Lee, and Amel Taysir, and then our members of the community liaison. I'm going to share some progress to date here. As of December 6th, we have completed 411 migrations. We currently have 241 active clients. We have 111 active LTCA applications, and the surveys in progress are at 57. and certificates of titles issued since June 2018 has been 43. And you'll see in the chart below that we have achieved our measurable goal of reaching the provincial average for Cherrybrook, Lake Loon, and Lincolnville, and we are en route to getting very close to having East Preston completed as well. We have 3 commissioners appointed, and that is Darlene Lamy, Doug Ruck, and Miss Connie Sparks, and they were appointed under the authority of the Department of Justice in July 2024. And their role includes adjudicating disputes, not limited to LTCA claims, using the Commercial Arbitration Act framework. They also administer our compensation fund, which is a $3 million fund, and it provides an innovative alternative where parties may receive compensation in place of property title. And this serves as a critical alternative dispute resolution mechanism for complex matters. And their key functions: commissioners focus on resolving the most challenging disputes through arbitration hearings, and they take a more community-centered approach to foster fair and equitable outcomes. And currently underway, we have our boundary expansion. The current boundaries do not cover the entire geography of the communities we serve. Community growth now has portions of communities falling outside of our service areas. And we did have a duty to consult with the Mi'kmaq community, and that is still underway. And just to give a little context, is sometimes a house on one side of a street may be within our boundaries of service, and then on the opposite side, they are not. And this does happen in several of our communities we serve. Letters to municipal councils are issued, and we're awaiting for approval. And this expansion this is to expand the boundaries within the current communities that we serve. The HRM regional plan revision. We have been working with HRM's planning team and the new ANS community action plan team on creating exemptions for subdivisions for ANS residents that aren't going through the LTCA, which is the only mechanism for exemptions currently. And this has been ongoing for a year. We are also working with the ANZA data team to take steps to make case management more efficient, working with resources working with resources we currently have. These steps will help us when we have Salesforce in the future. And adding additional communities. Once the regulations are enacted, we will begin focusing the next step on adding additional communities. Research has already been completed and is being updated regarding the state of unclear title in other ANS communities. And the plan will be developed outlining the expansion very soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us for our presentation. And if you have any other questions that you're not comfortable putting in the chat there, our email is attached on the last slide. Please reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly and Larissa. I see there's one question in there. You can choose to address it now or perhaps after the presentations are over. That's fine as well. And Curtis, I believe you were going to come up next to speak about the Hammonds Plains Community Land Trust.
Sure. Excuse me. Yes, thanks everyone. Stand by. Right. I want to thank my team for presenting on the Land Titles Initiative. I wear two hats. So I work on the Land Titles Initiative by day, and I work in my community um, advocating for and the implementation of community land trusts as a mechanism to facilitate community transformation. And so it's not often that I get to present both. Well, this is the first time actually that I've been in a setting where I'm either usually just doing the Land Titles Initiative or usually just doing the CLT work. So I'm encouraged by this opportunity to share both. So, and with that being said, I don't do the community land trust. Is all of this that you're about to see is work that I do as a volunteer in my community. It's not part of the Land Titles Initiative. So let's get started. We have a land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that we live in Mi'kma'ki, and these are the ancestral unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people. And these territories are covered by peace and friendship. And we acknowledge that people of African descent have been living in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we offer gratitude and honor them for everything that they've done for us. So as African Nova Scotians, we stand at a place of reckoning, reconciling the African Nova Scotian pursuit for restoration of lands with a profound respect for the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, pledging to navigate this path with empathy, and a shared commitment to justice, stewardship, and mutual respect. So I'm gonna take you up home. There's two up homes in Nova Scotia. North Preston, it's a kind of a colloquial name that we use to talk about our communities. So often folks from North Preston will say, I'm going up home. They're referring to North Preston. And we do the same thing in Upper Hammonds Plains, probably because it starts with upper. So it's located approximately 25 kilometers northwest of the Halifax Peninsula. And our community is rooted in history, similar to what the navigators were able to present. So the refugees from the War of 1812 were primarily settled in Upper Hammonds Plains, along with free Blacks who bought their own freedom. And so Upper Hammonds Plains was settled in 1815 when those refugees and free Blacks arrived in Nova Scotia, and they were offered. This isn't a historical document of one of the land grants. So there was land grants, but they never actually got conveyed. And I'll show you what that looks like today. But our community faced a lot of historical challenges related to land ownership, disease, in particular TB, tuberculosis, killed hundreds of people in our community. And we had segregation and fires and land expropriations. So when the first settlers came to Upper Hammonds Plains, I guess proper, was a forestry. The main industry was timbering. There was a mature, dense forest. And so, for example, my great-great-grandfather was a cooper on a plantation in Virginia. And so he used to craft barrels to ship tobacco back overseas. And so he brought those skills and others like him to Upper Hammonds Plains. And so the main industry was lumbering and coopering. So they were, manufacturing long timber as well as wooden barrels. And so my family started a business. It was one of the longest running Black businesses in Canada, the Whiley sawmill. And this is a picture of Pockwalk Lake. The mills were powered by water. So there was the water wheels, and you can imagine a lot of industry happening on this lake, this Pockwalk Lake. There was segregation in our community. The children were not allowed to go to this school in Lower Hammonds Plains because it was segregated. So, Black children weren't allowed. So we built our own one-room schoolhouse, which was a segregated school for Black children. And today our community center is actually built around, as you can see the pitched roof, like this was the original one-room schoolhouse. And so the community center is actually built around it, which I find fascinating. And so there's one wall, which inside the community center, which is that original brick wall that people often put their hands on. Really deep-rooted history. And we have a historic fire hall in our community. Given the context of the industry, and again, fire service would not come to the community when there was fires. Fires destroyed and hundreds of homesteads, and people would just constantly have to rebuild, or a fire would break out in a mill, right? And they would have to rebuild the whole mill, start fresh somewhere else. And so our community founded the first all-Black volunteer fire department in Canada in Upper Hammonds Plains. And it was eventually decommissioned in 2012 based on funding, but there's an exciting update with that. The last one, almost the last thing, was land expropriation. So in the 1960s, 1970s, Halifax County was slated to boom, right? And they needed water services. And so there was sites that they were looking at to build this water infrastructure. And so what ended up happening was the government of the day expropriated lands all around the Pocwock Lake and constructed the J.D. Klein water treatment facility, which would supply water to all of Halifax, most of Halifax County. That was built in 1974. And they erected fences so that was restricting access. So the community members could not use that lake, obviously, anymore, and it become a critical infrastructure site. The most egregious is that the main water main flowed through the backyards of our community, but we were not given access to that water because it's a gravity-fed system, and the argument was that it could not be pumped back up the hill. And so that led to a lengthy litigation process, which later became known as the water fight. And 25 years later, the community was granted access to the water, and the water pipes were eventually run back up into the community. And then, more of the contemporary issue is, what has been happening in regard to development in Upper Hammonds Plains. So favorable zoning in our community is this general use zone. So basically, developers, speculators can build and permit as of right without doing development agreements. And so it became a very valuable space community for development. And it is on the kind of on the edge of Hammonds Plains, which is a growth node for our municipality. And so developers started to buy land from folks and start to permit the sites. They weren't building initially very substantially, but that later changed. And so what we saw is this fragmentation of our community, with developments being built larger and larger and larger, with permanent fractures to our landscape. So we have large developments happening, like real estate investment trusts. There's all kinds of big developments happening in our community, and businesses. So these are two family homes, and there's car lots on either side, because again, the bylaw, the zoning was relaxed so that people in the community could have more open uses, right? But that later became a big advantage to others. And so to set the context, this is the Pocwock Road. Our church, Emmanuel Baptist Church, which many are familiar with, is in this area, but Upper Hammonds Plains is defined by the Pocwock Road. People often call our community Pocwock based on this road and this lake, but the community is actually Upper Hammonds Plains. And so I've identified some parcels on here, which are basically they're in a precarious title position. They can't be leveraged by community for community benefit. You see this large, Big Melvin piece of property. This is a piece of the Melvin land tract, which I skipped over, but it was granted to the community in 1855 for forestry, right? So that the residents could use this plot of land to harvest timber to use in their mills and all of that. And so when the expropriation happened, it restricted our access to this parcel because, again, the fence was erected and then Halifax Water became, took possession of all the lands around it. And then you can see by by the hashing that there's actually a protected watershed zone applied to that. So there's layers of this is an example of when we talk about systemic barriers, right? There's physical barricades, there's legislated barricades, and again, the community's capacity to be able to, develop solutions to or uses for this to benefit the community today. When I talked about that land grant at the beginning of the conversation, you can see here the size and shape of these parcels. These are like the 10 acres and a mule that would have been granted in that land grant and that weren't. So now they sit as they've never been able to be used for community benefit. And they're sitting here as in a title position that we know fondly as ungranted lands. So with all that being said, I'm going to move into talking more about community land trusts and what they are. And it's really rooted in land democracy and the civil rights movement. And I think that's been lost in today's conversations around community land trusts. The first community land trust was established in Albany, Georgia by a group of Black sharecroppers. And it was called the New Communities, Inc. And it was a way for them to, band together to be able to create a community where they could be protected and would own the community and would be able to, create a safe physical space for them. But later, of course, that was destroyed. So when we're talking about community land trust, a community land trust is a member-based nonprofit that stewards land in perpetuity for community's benefit. And they act as a social change mechanism. So they build stronger, more supportive communities by having a unified voice. And it puts community in the driver's seat. It gives us a self-determined approach to the things that are happening in our community. It puts community's interests first, and it plays a role in countering market-driven displacement. And an important role in stabilizing communities. And in the African Nova Scotian context, African Nova Scotian communities like the ones we're talking about are some of the last examples of true community where legacy families have lived shoulder to shoulder for hundreds of years. And a lot of them have land, right? But they're locked in estates or they're ungranted from the government. And one individual person or family is not going to likely be successful in using our legal system to be able to gain possession of them, or stewardship is what I like to say. And so CLTs have the potential to create capacity for community transformation by using a unified voice to take stewardship of communal held parcels and bring them to a higher use. And their scalability of this is also profound, right? So we're talking about just Upper Hammonds Plains for this particular scenario, but you can imagine there are 52 communities that could all be doing this, right? And could all be, could become a significant force if a coalition were established across communities. So what have we been doing in particular in Upper Hammonds Plains? So we doing a lot of advocacy. We helped to rezone the community to amend the GU1 zone. That happened in January of 2022 to restrict basically anything more than a duplex from being built without a development agreement. You can still build exactly what you could build before, but it requires a DA, which requires community participation. We've incorporated our community land trust and done a number of organizational development projects. We started to work with Halifax Water. We did a strategic plan. We actually delivered Atlantic Canada's first housing solutions lab, which I'll talk about. We took a liberated land trust tour and traveled throughout the US to meet other Black-led CLTs across the US because we share history with African Americans, right? We have a similar experience, cultural experience in this world. We're collaborating with other African Nova Scotian organizations like Akuma and the Decade for People of African Descent Coalition. We developed a housing strategy. We're working with the African Nova Scotian Community Action Program, which is this an HRM, a new HRM division that we're a part of, and we're doing acquisition action. So here is a photo of the gates at the water treatment facility opening, because through our collaboration, we were able to go in, and a group of us stood on Pakwak Lake. I had never seen the lake. I was like 33, had never seen this water, and it had never been touched in 40 years. It's crystal clear. And it's where all the drinking water comes from. When you turn on a tap in downtown Halifax, that water is coming from Pakwak Lake. This is us standing on the Melvin Land Tract for the first time. This historical land that we couldn't get to for decades. This is a group. These are two of our board members advocating for the rezoning at City Hall, and you can see the chambers were completely full with community members supporting those changes, which was inspiring. And this photo here is a picture of our board members and a staff person. And we're meeting Shirley Sherrod, who was one of the founders of New Communities, Inc., right? So we got to meet this woman who, unbeknownst to her, would start a movement of community land trusts and empowerment internationally. So it was really profound to meet her. And so we conducted a solutions lab, and it was based on a couple of key questions. We had a very high amount of participation in this lab too for our community, because we've been able to continue to kind of build momentum and get involved in these large projects. So in order to build a strong foundation, we have to answer some critical questions. And those were around access to land, governance, and our relationship with the Mi'kmaq community. So this was the launch of our solutions lab. We had a community dinner, and you can see people participating. So we were really trying to figure out and dig into, how are we going to establish membership? How are we going to govern ourselves? Because this is a community-led structure, and we make decisions. We work with the community directly to develop, any of the things that we're doing. And so there were some key questions that came out of those first kind of sessions. And so we're getting checking the temperature on what community's mind is around a number of really critical areas like land use, membership, the distribution of benefits, and decision making. And then we kind of really got into the weeds. We had to talk about, basically situations like, to become a member, you must have a clear connection to the community. What does that mean? And so we had these brave conversations about belonging and how people show up in the community. And it was really important for us to have these conversations as we start to actually take action and create transformation. So the lessons learned was, so I say here, what made the difference in the public participation? We went door to door to invite people to the sessions. And so I think, if there's something you can take away from this, if you do public participation, it's that. And we did door to door, kind of updates. We sent out a ton of different messaging, even in between the sessions, because they were like concurrent over time. So if we had a session the next week, we sent out a newsletter. So we tried to keep that going, keep the buzz going. We also, for example, selected table leads, because we actually conducted this almost like a conference, if you will, with breakout sessions. And it's like the little things, like selecting a table lead, because everyone's been in those sessions where, you do a breakout and then we all have to decide, well, who's going to be presenting? And then everyone, you're in that mode of, do I want to present or not? And then everyone's quiet. So we selected a table lead, remove that creates anxiety for people sometimes, right? Remove that. People were able to really fully engage because they knew that they knew exactly who was going to share the results. It's those little things that matter when trying to engage the public or engage communities. We talked a lot about descendancy. We had those brave conversations. We had to really talk about what's a member and who's a beneficiary, right? Like, who can be members of the land trust, but that might be different from those that benefit from the land trust. and a process for folks that if they don't fit what we developed was a framework for membership. And if for whatever reason someone doesn't through that framework become a member or is recommended to be a member, they can, it's essentially another name for an appeal process, but we thought that appeals were negative. So we wanted to have this member inclusion process, and then the decision whether someone can be a member goes back to the general membership and they vote. So we've done all this work, and what has it amounted to? So I'm going to talk about our project that we have ongoing. In this past summer, CMHC announced a co-op development fund that's $1.5 billion. And I thought, oh my gosh, won't that be amazing? Too bad we're not really in a place to be able to do this kind of proposal, but wouldn't it be great? Here I'm showing, this is an actual aerial shot of these are all developments happening in just one small section of the community, just to show you the amount of stuff that's happening. You know, there's like 300 or 400 townhomes being built here. There's a concrete 4-level high rise, well, what we would consider a high rise building for our community here. And then you can see strips of other multis. This is again town housing. This is an apartment building. That's an apartment building. So there's a substantial amount of development happening. And again, this is in only one small area. And here you can see this site is getting ready to be developed. It's getting ready, what they call pad ready. And this is permitted for 136 units. And so these were developers that we used to not agree with, obviously. But because we were able to change the zoning and because of these programs that are available, we were able to kind of turn the tide a bit. And so what we ended up doing was partnering with that developer and submitting a proposal to build these homes ourselves and establish what will be the first housing co-op in our community, a social housing co-op. Otherwise, these units would have been gone to the market and we would have been priced out of them. So we submitted a proposal to build these, and we're so excited about the possibility of making that happen. Hopefully, we'll be able to share updates with you on that project very soon. This project will change the trajectory of our community forever. It will lay the foundation for all of our communities to realize that this kind of transformation is possible and really set us on a strong path forward. Another project that we have going is that site that you were looking at is here. It's that co-op site, but adjacent to that are these parcels, which for a long time were in a title position that's called owner unknown. But in October of 2022, they became Crown lands and subject to the Crown Lands Act. So under the Act, you can actually apply to purchase Crown lands. And so we started to trace the titles on these to try to determine if they belonged at one point to our ancestors. And so you can see these historical maps are actually drawn in pen and pencil. This is a zoomed in version which shows the names of these lots. And then we took those names to the archives and started to search to see if we could connect any of these names back to the refugees. And we were able to actually find the landing paperwork of those names coming as refugees from the War of 1812. You can see the names here, which proves that at one time, these parcels were to be allotted to our ancestors. And so we applied to purchase these in June of 2023. And finally, in October of 2024, we received approval to begin site feasibility and pre-development planning on these sites to see if they are feasible for development. And if they are feasible, there's a likelihood that we will be able to obtain these. And you can see its proximity. I mean, it'd be right next to the co-op, which is so exciting. We also have a 7-megawatt solar farm development underway. Upper Hammonds Plains has the Shabukdo Pockwalk wind farm. It's 5 wind turbines. They were built in, I think, 2015. The same company now has a solar company or subsidiary, and they're proposing to build a 7 megawatt solar farm in the community. And so this is going to be a partnership between 4 community-based organizations, which are the Land Trust, the Community Development Association, the Melvin Land Tract Protection Society, and the Emmanuel Baptist Church. And this will create sustainable revenue for our community. The last project is a site feasibility and planning activity with the Emmanuel Baptist Church. This is the church here. This is the parking lot. Here you can see this is the same parking lot from an aerial view, and there's all of this other area. So now we're working to establish a partnership with the church whereby we can determine the ability for us to create housing opportunities here, and potentially, recreation or a park. So collaboration between our organizations and our community is really something that we are, really grounded in. And so that's what I have to share with you today. Lots of exciting updates. I always end our presentation with a picture of Wakanda from Black Panther, because when I saw Black Panther for the first time, it moved me. I think just because of the place, the spaces, and the technological advancement and the futurism that was depicted in that film. And so that is kind of the vision that we have for the communities, our African Nova Scotian communities, and what they can become. And we're, bit by bit proving that we are going to be able to create significant transformation. And so if you want to follow what's going on, we can subscribe to our newsletter. We don't send out we won't, give you a barrage. We send out one a month, if that. So please consider subscribing and following along. Thanks a lot.
Curtis, wow. Thank you so much for sharing such an incredible story of community mobilization and future making. It gives me goosebumps to see how much you've achieved as a volunteer base of community people. It's just incredible. I imagine that you're getting inundated with requests to teach and share and expand and allow others to be inspired and run and replicate. It's really, thank you so much for sharing. I look forward to hearing more. It's really incredible.
Of course, yes. I'm so excited for the future, and it's really giving us hope that these things are possible. So thanks.
Thank you. Over to you, Sunday Miller and Akuma Holdings. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So, before I do that, I'm also going to give a little land acknowledgement. Akuma acknowledges that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, who have lived here for over 10,000 years. And we recognize and express our gratitude and appreciation to the Mi'kma'ki people who now permit us to live on their land. We honor them and the strength exhibited during the trials that they have endured and continue to endure. We also acknowledge the many people of African descent whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade against their will and made to work on these lands. Akuma recognizes that African Nova Scotians are a distinct founding people in Nova Scotia who have been a key part of the province's culture and history. We also honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent whose teachings, strength, and perseverance continue to challenge and inspire our community. I'm going to go back one. I want to give you a little bit of history on Akuma and how we came to be. In the late 1800s, early 19th century, children, Black children who were orphaned, had no place to go due to segregation. They were not allowed to be housed with white children. So they were either put in jail or in an insane asylum. And so there were some people within the Black community decided, okay, this isn't right. We need to do something for these children. And so what they wanted to do was to create something and model it after the Tuskegee work that was being done in Alabama. And in Tuskegee, that was where a slave owner who actually got, not a slave owner, a slave gathered other slaves around him. And what they did is that they built a school and they taught people trades, and they were very industrious. And as a matter of fact, Tuskegee ended up producing more millionaires than Stanford, Harvard, and Columbia put together. And so that's what they wanted to create here in Halifax, was an industrial school for children of African descent who were orphaned. But then we had this, and they had bought land in the northern part of Halifax. They had teachers in place. They knew who the orphans were that were going in. And then we had a major catastrophe in 1917. We had the Halifax explosion. And so if the children and the teachers had moved in just 2 weeks prior, everyone would have been destroyed. And so as a result of that, they decided, okay, we need to get away from the city, but we still need land. And so the province basically got land, came to Dartmouth and purchased farmland so that there was a place for the children. And the land is now called Akuma, and it became the site for the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, which was the only Black orphanage in Canada. And of course, that makes sense because the majority, when Blacks came, I mean, as we've already heard, the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, the refugees, the Caribbean, it was to Nova Scotia that they came, and this is where the largest Black population was in Canada at the time. And the African United Baptist Association was very instrumental in the creation of this orphanage. And the intent was to keep families together. It was not uncommon for there to be 12 and 13 children in a family. And it was recognized that if they lost their parents, they were traumatized. But if we separated them from their siblings, that's another trauma. So the idea was to keep them together so that they would, try and heal as well as possible. The home ended up being closed in the late 78, 79, because of the fact that orphanages were no longer the way to go. And group homes. So group homes were created, and the children were transferred to the group homes. The vision of Akuma is to take advantage of opportunities and provide services that's basically going to benefit the African Nova Scotian community. But the focus is the mission, which is to steward the assets. And the assets includes the land that they were given as a result of taking over the land from the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children. And they want to create economic and social opportunities for people of African descent as well as people in general. And I think it's really important that I let people know, we talk about Akuma, but we don't recognize that there are actually two separate entities. One of them is the Akuma Family Center, and they are responsible for taking care of the children. And we still focus on family. The other is Akuma Holdings, and that is specifically in place to actually develop the 320 acres of land that we have. And this is just a picture of the land, just to sort of, and for those of you who are in Halifax, just to give you an understanding of the extent of the land, this is Main Street here, and this street here, this is Old Lawrencetown Road. And so Old Lawrencetown Road cuts through the property that Akuma has. I want to give you a little brief thing on the current status of Akuma. Okay, don't seem to. Okay, here we go. So this is an aerial view of Akuma, just a small portion of it. So this would have been where the orphanage was. This would have been the home where the superintendent lived. This would have been where the schoolhouse, the two-room schoolhouse was. And this has become the annex, and this is the hydroponic farm. And this is the largest, the longest, and the widest driveway you've ever seen. It was Old Miller Road, and now we have to call it a driveway, but I'll get to that later. So this is just an overview of the property. And remember when I had said that the orphanage turned to group homes? Well, just to give you an update on the family center, these are the two buildings that look like this for the family center, and this is where the children were taken. And now we are basically focusing on younger children, capacity. The largest is 6. And the reason it's 6 is because we are dealing with and housing children who are on the spectrum. And so we do have siblings together. The challenge, of course, is that they're not supposed to be in our center for a long term, just short-term stays until we find places where they can be fostered or be able to go back home. But as you can see, it says the average stay is 309. And that's because in some cases when the children are fostered out, then the families say, we just really can't handle the behavior or the challenges. And so the children come back until we can find another spot for them. The second building is now presently being used for East Preston daycare. They expanded, and our second building was used in that way. This is what the space looks like on a good day when the children are, when we know that we're going to be doing a presentation and we take pictures and make it look good. So this is the heritage property, and it's gotten heritage designation, and you can see the community garden here, and a closer up view. But I want to focus now on the Kinney Place. This is what it's called. It was named after the superintendent of the orphanage, and it's now become a business hub. And we recognize this picture is due to that there were allegations regarding things that happened at the home for colored children. And we recognize that there was pain that was there, and we have the roots that go down. But we also recognize that there were children who were blessed to have been here at the orphanage who, if they hadn't been at the orphanage, may not have survived. And so there's the two sides. There are those who were harmed, and then there were those who were blessed. And so we recognize that, and we recognize that we need to move forward. So we've taken this building, which has been a blessing for many, and we've turned it into a continued blessing by providing it as a hub for businesses. So we have a hair studio in there. We have Opus, which is a restaurant. This was our social room, which it isn't anymore because the library has moved in and taken over as office space. But we've also put in electrical vehicle charging units. So we've got a couple of those on site. And we have, in the building, we also have 902 Man Up. The MLA offices are there. And so Africadian Empowerment Academy. So we have a number of different organizations present in the building, taking advantage of the space. And part of that is because it's cheaper rent than having to go downtown and pay $25 to $30 per square foot. In 2018, we did a housing needs assessment, and the priorities were identified as affordable housing that was high on the list, seniors housing, long-term care facilities, traffic, trails, a number of different things were put in place. And so what we did is that we started looking at affordable homes. So we got the Rapid Housing Initiative, and we went to the land and we started clearing it. And what we did is that we built 4 2-bedroom duplexes that are deeply affordable. And we worked with people who were in the shelters for them to identify. We had an income cutoff, and we had criteria. And for that committee to identify who should come into these homes that we had built. And so ADSM, Souls Harbor, SHIM, all of these different organizations identified young mothers with children who could move into the 8 homes that we had built. This is a process that was with CMHC and the Department of Housing. And the deeply affordable meant that they paid between $650 and $1,000 a month. And we cover heat, lights, power, internet. They have washer and dryer in each unit. We had a launch for this event in October of 23, and people were able to move in December of 23, and it was basically a Christmas gift for them. It's called Fairfax because Reverend Fairfax taught Sunday school to the students in the orphanage. And Reverend Donald Skier, he was actually on the chair of the board. And Paris Lane is because 2 of the instructors or matrons at the orphanage their last names were Paris. And so this is our way of honoring our history and our legacy in this. And Door Construction was involved with helping us develop and build, because their motto or their tagline is, we build community. And that's what we want to do. We want community, and we want to build community. So I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures more about, this is the overview of what Fairfax looks like once we had finished it. And this is the completed exterior with the paved roads. And these are some internal pictures, just the entrance that sort of shows the seating area, dining area, kitchen, and then the child's bedroom and the bathroom. And I'd like to make a statement right now before I go any further, because we talk about affordable homes, but affordable could mean that you're in the basement that's damp and rat infested. It's affordable, but it's not nice and it's not good. And so what we wanted to create were nice, good homes that people would feel good in and feel proud to be living in. And we think we accomplished that quite well. So there are certain housing initiatives that are presently in development. And remember, I had mentioned to you that we house children on the autism spectrum. Well, some of the children are also disabled. And so one of the challenges that we're realizing is that children who are disabled or have behavioral issues do not work well together. It's not good for them to be put together. It's not necessarily safe. And so we're trying to create a new family center that will have children with behavioral issues on one side, and then children that are on the spectrum on the other side. We are in the process of waiting to hear back from DCS as to whether they will actually support and whether this is actually doable. But that's one of the initiatives that is underway. As well as Fairfax Homes, we're doing an expansion. So we're expanding Fairfax, putting in at least another 32, 36, maybe 60 homes across the way. And we're also doing some work at Lake Loon on some more duplexes. But this time around, they will be 3 and 4 bedrooms. This is just a rendering of what it might look like. We go back. It's 3 or 4 bedrooms, and it's going to be market. And we're looking at, for people, it's not deeply affordable. It will be affordable. We're looking at for people who are working so that they are able to have homes themselves. We're also doing a long-term care facility. This is a partnership with the province in Northwood, and it's going to be a 144-bed facility. And so we're looking at anywhere between 240, 250 jobs are going to be generated as a result of this. And again, we're moving forward with this with an Afrocentric Advisory Committee. We've got people together. They've worked with the architects as how we came up with the look on the outside. So it's a community input on the development of that. And we will continue using the Afrocentric Advisory Committee as we go forward with, hiring and that sort of thing. Other developments that are in progress are the second Black Business Hub. Kinney Place, which is a hub, business hub, and also the annex has been used as a hub. They're full. But we still have people approaching us and saying, we want to be in the community. Do you have space? So we're in the process of building a second Black business hub. It's going to be Black businesses, serving Black businesses. And we'll be striving for zero net emissions. And this is sort of just a little rendering of what it looks like. We're also working on a center of excellence, a sports center. We got some money to do a feasibility study, so we're presently working on that. It will be a phased-in approach, but we recognize that we're very close to the Prestons, Terrybrook, Lake Loon. We also recognize that there's a lot of probably untapped potential within those communities. When you look at a lot of the sports, some of the real important or major players are of African descent. And so we are thinking this would be an opportunity if we've got something that's a bit closer that they can get to, that maybe they will be able to develop different athletic abilities and make a difference in their own lives and in the lives of their community economically. And so various organizations that have already approached us, saying we need more space. So we're looking at that. The ultimate goal, of course, is to have something for the community and to grow the ability and skills within the community. So future plans is that Black-owned funeral home, cemetery, and crematorium. We've been approached by a Black-owned company in Ontario who's interested in putting something on land. We want to have a Black vendors market because we have so many people within the community who have crafts and they're always going off to markets. We'd like to have a place where they could actually be housed. We're looking at a seniors complex and developing trails, having a hotel, a Black Artist Society, and of course, more homes built on the site. Again, this is the 320 acres. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have. If you see this blue line here, this whole thing was identified as urban reserve, which meant that you can apply for a permit, but you won't get it. In other words, you can't build on it. But then, they kept advocating. So then they said, okay, you can build within the blue line. When we built Fairfax, which was here, was here, because this is the family center, we didn't have access to sewer. So we had to use septic tanks, which meant our square footage per home had to be larger than what it would normally have been. So instead of us being able to put in 6 or 8 homes, we could only put in 4. And so part of the challenge we have is that we're not serviced as far as sewer and water. And so, but what ended up happening in 23, Premier Houston indicated that he wanted to have a long-term care facility, and Akuma got one of the sites. And so what he did, you notice, is outside of our mod zone, which is what it was called. This blue part was called the mod zone, which means that you can have multi-use for it. It was outside, but he gave us special designation. And so then what we decided that we would do, well, if we can get special designation for this, why can't we get special designation for the whole thing? And so we've been working on that, and that was granted about a month or so ago. We got special designation for the whole area. So the boundaries that prevented development, it's been switched. But we have issues, with the bedrock, traffic challenges. Anyone who's been here coming out and going left is always a challenge. The wetland, and of course, financial resources. That's a major issue. But we're working on all of that. But looking forward to 24 and 25, we want more homes, 3 and 4 bedroom. We want to continue the plans that I've showed you for the new children's homes. We're going to be looking at initiating plans for affordable homes for working parents. We want to also initiate plans for disabled, service homes, also, and plan our seniors housing. And also, not that it's stated here, but we also want to look at what we can put around Broom Lake as far as developing trails and maybe putting little cottages around Broom Lake for when people come home and want to have some place to stay. The benefits, I think, are obvious. We're the largest Black landowner that we know of and developer in Canada at this point in time. But, the reality of it is that it gives people the opportunity to stay in their own community, to have employment, to, start an idea, to be creative. It also means that the services are going to be here. It provides Black businesses with the opportunity to have employment and work because they're working on the building and the development that's going on. Also, too, we're more than willing to share our knowledge with the other Black communities that have land. We are sort of like a land trust in the sense that we will never sell the land. It will be leased for those who want to come on and participate. So like the long-term care facility, Northwood is leasing that land from us. And then, of course, there are all the volunteer opportunities, so it's by us and for us. And so if anyone's interested in being part of what we're doing, you can contact us, to get on some of our committees. We got these are all the volunteer opportunities for communication, gardening, marketing, the youth program, fundraising program. There's a number of them. So if you're interested, you can always, or even something that's not listed here, you can identify it and just contact us. We're working with Dave Harrison, who's a former planner for the city, and Abigail Moria, who's with the Black Planning Project. We have architects on board and engineers, and then of course our Gassel Philanthropic, who helps us with our fundraising and writing of grants. Dora Construction has been a very much a big player in helping us with our renovations and our development, and we're following the Road to Economic Prosperity for African Nova Scotians report, and it's been an exciting run. So if you wish to contact us, you can do it at any of these. And I should say that if you want to keep abreast of what's going on, then you can just go on to our website at akuma.ca and sign up for our newsletter, and that will keep you informed as to what's going on. It goes out every 3 weeks, giving you updates on what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunday, for sharing that, again, incredibly inspiring story of community building and future building, and to acknowledge that the work that you're doing is touching folks from childhood now into senior life and even beyond, with talks of cemeteries and crematoriums. It's just so amazing to see the breadth of work and how you're touching so many lives, from people with disabilities to young mothers to entrepreneurs and crafters. There's really nothing that has not been considered and incorporated into the work that you're doing. So congratulations. I'm sure that you're also very popular and probably being inundated to tweet and showcase and give people tips on how they can replicate the incredible work that's happening there. So wow, it's just such a full presentation across the board, from the land titles to the Upper Hammonds Plains Land Trust and to Akuma. There's so much positive work happening. And when you consider that all of this is happening in the context of a nationwide housing crisis, the leadership that's been demonstrated through the work that's been spoken of here today is truly a bright light when you look at the challenges that exist, and how much is being done regionally, and just how we can all continue to learn from the folks within the African Nova Scotian and Black communities, by way of just the community trust and investment in one another and the future. Thank you all. I know there are a few questions that had been popped into the Q&A box, and I did see one specifically asking if someone would speak about how the inability to attain land in early years has been prohibitive for the building of wealth over time. I wonder if you can check in that Q&A there, and if either Curtis, Sunday, Larissa, or Holly, whoever best feels equipped to address that.
Sure, I can offer some thought. I guess the short answer is no. If we're talking about a larger conversation again about reparation or trying to address that gap that exists, that's beyond the scope of our initiative. So what we can, all that basically what we're addressing through the LTI is simply reviewing folks' individual interests based on as much evidence as they can produce on a specific parcel. And that becomes complex, right? Especially if there's no real use in occupation. So you can imagine that if there's one party that's saying that they have historical ties to this parcel and they're making a claim to it, and it goes out for a certificate of claim, the evidence is similar for any objector, right? So when somebody that ends up objecting to that certificate by asserting their interest in that same parcel is based on, oral history, and not so much on use and occupation, right? So then you have matters that involve many parties. And that is why we have to have so many firms, right? Because every interest has to be in a separate law firm. So we have matters that have 8 parties, right? 8 different interests, all asserting in one action or one file or one matter. And of course, we know that there's parcels that have hundreds of interests in them. And so, the Land Titles Initiative doesn't have a scope for that, right? And so nor is there really legislation or legal processes to address that. And that's kind of where, separate from the Land Titles Initiative, the work of community mobilization and having a unified voice could play a role. And that's kind of where I came to understand how this could be used and applied in our communities, right? When I see scenarios like that in my day-to-day work. And so we are going to be able to address some of those things, could address some of those types of scenarios by having a community, a mechanism, a community land trust. However, there are still going to be situations where there's parcels that have good roots of title that vests in one particular person or one family, and all those heirs may have some type of interest in it, right? May have some value that they want to be able to be conveyed from that estate or from the sale of that parcel. And so the Probate Act really is not the mechanism for that, right? Because you'd have to there'd just be such a complex process to get, hundreds of people on board to, address one particular parcel. It's impossible currently. I hope that answers the question. Not certain.
Thanks, Curtis. I'm not seeing anything. I guess there was a question around inclusive housing for members of the 2S LGBTQIA community. I think that was directed to you, Sunday, but I don't know if you want to address that specifically or if that would just generally be part of a PUMA's.
Yeah, I mean, our focus is African descent people, whether you're two-spirited, LGBTQ, or disabled, or whatever. That's not, if you're African descent and you need housing, we don't discriminate.
That was one thing that shone through for me is just how across the board inclusive your work is and just what an inspiration. In lieu of other questions submitted, folks still have a couple of minutes if they wish to. But to both Curtis, from the perspective of the Hammonds Plains Community Land Trust, and you, Sunday, what advice would you have for other communities elsewhere in Nova Scotia or beyond that are looking to follow this model and just begin the work? I know, Curtis, you mentioned knocking on doors, like where can folks begin?
Well, how about number one? It's a lot of work. So you have to recognize that this isn't something that you're going to start and have results in 6 months. So you have to be willing to be there for the long haul and to slog away. And I think that there are more doors open now than there were like 4 or 5 years ago. But the reality of, and especially community land trust, this is new because I looked at community land trust when I was at Africville, and there was no interest. Like it was like the door was constantly being slammed in my face because it wasn't the right time. But it's still, you keep moving forward and working. And also too, you need to recognize those who are for you and with you. And those are the ones that you hang with and that you work with. And they are the ones that will support you. And the naysayers will get on board once they see the good work. So how do you start? Do you have land? Do you have the papers? Do you have connections with government? If not, start networking, start identifying who you should be speaking to, connect with them, but do it in a manner for discussion as opposed to, being angry or aggressive. We're moving forward, and we're moving forward together, and we need them, but we also have to speak our truth, which is the historical injustice, and that there needs to be recognition for that. And this is a solution. And so, yeah, you just got to start and join some of the organizations that are out there, the community land trust organizations, the different housing organizations, so that you're getting out there, you're seeing who's doing what, and networking. Curtis, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sunday. Look, Akuma, like Sunday, I can't say enough great things about them. Akuma was the guiding light for me when I started. It made me feel like it was possible in our community when I saw what Akuma was doing. And I collaborated with them and all the passion that they have. And there's a community for us, right? We've started to try to build out this kind of what is the Nova Scotia Black Community Housing Council. So there is a space if you're feeling interested in collaborating with us. And you raised a great point, Sunday, about being upset. I spent a lot of time being upset in the beginning. I would go to the meetings and I would be like, rah, rah, like this issues and you're not understanding and these issues. And it took time for me to feel like I got that all out of my system. I'll be honest with you. But the biggest thing, you got to start. I really started with the community. We saw our built space changing rapidly. And we began, started this community land trust and thought we were going to be able to build housing. But really, the first thing we did was starting a whole rezoning practice. Had nothing to do with really getting into that. But that is where the mobilization kind of started, right? And getting that first, and we still don't own anything, right? The community land trust, we've been operating for a long time, talking about the things we're going to do. But we still don't own anything. We have some substantial things going on that will lead to that. But it has taken years. And Sunday, you hit this on the head. This took a substantial amount of dedication and hard work, relentless hard work. And I think people, sometimes that part is, you're not seeing that, all of the work that goes on in the background. But yeah, I would start there. Start with community meetings. The other thing is, you need to start with that kind of community map. You need to understand what the parcels are, right? And where they are and which ones are in which stages and which ones, because there's strategies for different ones, right? And so that's where I would start, right? Getting regular meetings happening, starting with that asset map, then you make an inventory, then kind of which strategies you can use for which ones. And up until this year, I didn't know when we would start to build something. We had proposed, I was like, oh, let's build a duplex, like a 2-unit, right? And then this big fund came along, right? So it's about just pushing forward and being set on a vision and being like wanting this to happen so badly. And then, things just, when opportunities come, you're ready to act on them.
And
Yeah.
remember, you're not doing this for yourself.
Yes,
Community.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
For for not only your current community and the folks that are around now, but for the future generations is just the most inspiring part of this, is that how
Generation.
it's really magical. I was thinking to myself that with all of the negativity in the news, there will be times where I am going to return to this conversation and rewatch this video so that I can be reminded of the incredible potential of community building for this sort of initiative. I just want to thank everybody. We're at time for this discussion. I'm sure we could go for twice as long in reflecting on all the work that you're doing, but I wanted to thank each of you, Sunday, Curtis, Larissa, and Holly, for taking the time to be so open and generous with the stories of the work that you're engaged in. And I would encourage folks to look for this recording on the Commission's website and circulate it to those that you think may be interested in the work that's going on. And there will be some links on the Commission's website as well, so that you can follow up and find out more information about ACOMA, the Land Titles Initiative, and the Upper Hammonds Plains Community Land Trust. I do also want to let folks know that there is a housing, human rights and the unhoused webinar discussion that's going to be taking place on Monday afternoon, just on the topic of housing and the current climate, both in Nova Scotia and nationally, that will be attended by the Canadian Federal Housing Advocate. So that's in the afternoon on Monday, and there are a number of other events taking place both this afternoon and throughout next week. So just final word, Curtis, Sunday, Larissa, Holly, any parting words for folks before we sign off?
It's worth getting involved in solving the housing crisis in the Black community, because once that's taken care of, people can actually dream. And we are creative people. And once that pressure is removed, who knows what we can do and how we can impact not just our community, but Nova Scotia for the good. Believe in yourself. We do. We believe in you.
I just want to thank everyone for their time and appreciate folks' engagement in our work. Part of what keeps us going is people understanding what's happening and being conscious. So, I'm just really grateful for anyone that's engaged and, encouraging anyone to stay connected in the work that's happening and sharing it.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Have a great day. Thank you.
See you.